Hello and welcome to the Penalty Box Perspective podcast. My name is Nathaniel and today I'm joined by my good friend Matt. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, how about yourself? All good?
Yes, I'm very good, very good. I'm very excited to talk about what we're going to be talking about today on our very first sort of mini pod here, talking about the top 10 picks of the NHL Entry Draft in 2025. So I don't know if you want to kick it off and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we discussed in our first episode, which you can go back and listen to, um, alongside our weekly rundown pods, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a mini pod, much like this, where we're going to delve into a specific topic. This week, we're going to be recapping the top 10 picks of this year's NHL 2025 entry draft. Just to give you guys a bit more information into, what we think about the picks and, who the future stars of the league are going to be. As I mentioned in the last episode, as a Chicago fan, I've really had to become attuned to the NHL draft and the prospects and everything like that because that's just where Chicago are at the moment. So it's definitely an area of the game that I'm very familiar with, and done an awful lot of reading, building up to the draft this year about all the prospects and everything. So it was a really interesting draft, but I'm sure we'll get into that a bit further.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a world where you probably have more knowledge than I do in this world. I keep up with the NHL. I don't really keep up with all the junior leagues and all the upcoming prospects and stuff. But I think what we'll talk about first is just how the NHL entry draft kind of works, because I think an important thing to cover is how, unlike, say, the NFL draft, where teams draft their players and they're pretty much ready to go, in the NHL it works slightly differently. So I don't really want to touch on that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very different to like you said, how maybe like the NFL draft works, or even maybe like the NBA draft and things like that. So a lot of the time in a lot of drafts, it's actually quite rare that you will see players jump straight into the league straight away. I know of the players that we're going to run through of these top 10. I think there's maybe off the top maybe two players that might be playing the majority of the season in the NHL this year. I think a lot of the time, because when they're drafting players at sort of 18, 19 years of age, because it's such a physical game, I think quite a lot of the time teams are very keen to send them back to their junior teams or have them go to college. In the NCAA, we're seeing a massive flurry of that at the moment. Or potentially they may send them, if they're a little bit older, if they're sort of 20, 21, they might then send them down into the American Hockey League in the AHL, which is sort of like the equivalent of the minor leagues. So, yeah, it's very different. Players definitely sort of marinate a lot more in the minors before they then come up into the NHL. But there are certain exceptions, which, we'll cover. That's definitely sort of it's definitely different, like you said, to how it works in the NFL.
And before we go on to the first overall pick, I think it's well worth noting how the NHL also has a lottery draft system, which means that the worst team in the league doesn't necessarily, they have a high percentage chance, but they don't necessarily get the first overall pick. So I think the San Jose Sharks would have got the first overall pick this year, but the New York Islanders, who had a 3.5% chance of winning this lottery, actually jumped up several spots up the order there. And then with their first overall pick, they picked D-man Matthew Schaefer from the Erie Otters in the OHL. What are your thoughts on them moving up, but also their selection with Matthew Schaefer?
Yeah, so the NA, for me personally, I really enjoy the lottery. I think it adds a certain element of sort of excitement to the draft. And I think one of the reasons why it was brought in was to just stop teams from sort of tanking year after year after year. So you might finish with the 32nd, worst points total in the end of the season, but that's not necessarily going to guarantee you, um, a, 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 the top overall pick. Um, so yeah, it was really interesting seeing the New York Islanders jump up. I believe their sort of default position would have been the 9th overall pick, but they've jumped up from 9 to 1. And that's given them the opportunity to pick Matthew Schaefer. So, yeah, 6'2", 186-pound left-handed shot defenseman. Widely regarded by many as, the best player in the draft. I mean, obviously he's gone first overall, and it was close between him and the second pick, but this draft is quite forward heavy. And I think as a defenseman, he really showcased his abilities last year in a season that was heavily blighted by injury. He only played 17 games. I mean, he did get 22 points within that time. So, he was still playing at over a point per game. But I think the fact that he only played 17 games really indicated that, this guy really is absolute mustard. And with each of these prospects, we've gone to eliteprospects.com, which I'd highly encourage you to take a look at. And they provide a bit of a rundown of each player, just to give you a little bit of like a blurb, so to speak, on how they look. So with Matthew Schaefer, they say that Schaefer controls the game from the back end, making the play flow through him. An elite puck rusher, he takes off from behind the net, using it as a shield against the forecheck, and traverses the defensive zone with a few long strides. He spots teammates in every direction, making both one-touch plays and elaborate deceptive feeds. Attacking down, he grabs a spotlight and draws opponents to him before turning and relaying the puck across. So I think what the New York Islanders have got here is there was certainly a lot of player comparisons to Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar, which I know is a very sort of quick comparison to make when you're looking at sort of a speedy offensive defenseman who can put up goals and points. I don't necessarily think that Schaefer will reach that level of likes of Hughes and Makar. I think that they are sort of generational, once in a blue moon defenseman. I do think that Schaefer will be an absolute cornerstone of the New York Islanders moving forward. And I think that them jumping up in the lottery did give them that opportunity to then trade Noah Dobson, which they did. They traded him to the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for quite a haul of picks. And I think with his entry-level contract signed, I think we'll see Matthew Schaefer play in the NHL this year. It'll be interesting to see how he gets on. Seems like a really professional kid. Was also really, really good seeing at the draft as well. He seems like a really good kid to root for. Obviously went through a lot of personal trauma last year, losing his mum to a battle with cancer, and it was really, really good to see how the New York Islanders showed their support for him at the NHL draft. And I would really encourage anyone to go back and watch that footage from the draft if they haven't seen it. I'm really excited about Schaefer. I think he's going to be I think he's someone who will settle into the league quite quickly, I think.
Yeah, it's something I think the Islanders will need as well, a bit of youth personality on the back end in the D line, which is going to be good. Just one last thing on the Islanders move up in the lottery, not to spoil things ahead, but I think it drastically changed what their plans were going to be heading into this draft with the lottery result. But we'll touch on that in a little bit. But we'll move on to the second overall pick then, the San Jose Sharks, who perhaps would have preferred the pick of Schaefer, however, picked Michael Misa, a centre from the Saginaw Spirit, again in the OHL. Again, just look at them points totals, Matt. 67 games played, 134 points on the season last year. What have you got to say about Misa?
Yeah, I absolutely love Michael Misa. Fantastic player. Like you said, 134 points in 67 games, which I think, if my mental maths is right, that's exactly 2 points per game. 182 pounds, 6'1" centerman with a left-hand shot. He was just absolutely outstanding for Saginaw last season, and he joins a San Jose team. Like you said, I think that the Sharks as a whole probably would have preferred to take Matthew Schaefer if that was going to be a case, because they are quite heavily loaded in that offensive area. But you're adding Michael Misa to a crop of players already, with the likes of Celebrini and Will Smith and Willie Meckland as well. So they're now going to have potentially 4 cornerstone pieces of their offense moving forward, who's just going to make them such a threat, moving forward. I think it's maybe up for debate yet if Michael Meese is going to be a long-term centre in the NHL or whether maybe he's going to move more as a winger. But I think that's the beauty of what they've got. They've got four players in the ones I mentioned there in Misa, Celebrini, Smith, and Eklund, and it's going to give them a lot of opportunities to to experiment with different pairings, and or maybe even have three of them on a line. I think it's going to be really interesting to see who lines up with who in the future. Elite Prospects describes Misa as capable of speeding past opponents and drawing complex rush patterns in the neutral zone. Misa finds and creates gaps in neutral zone coverages. He drives east to west and under and over teammates' routes, slows down and accelerates and slips pucks under sticks, always keeping defenders on their heels. Away from the puck, he's constantly relocating from pocket to pocket, reloading to the top of the zone, sprinting behind defenders and playing between them. So I think what they've got potentially is a forward who can do a little bit of everything. He can score, he can create. It's maybe we're yet to see how his defensive game looks. I think when a player is that dominant in the Canadian juniors level, I mean, as you could see, Misa was playing far and above his competition. Be interesting to see how his defensive game looks, because sometimes when players are streets ahead of everyone else, they don't have to defend quite as much because, they know that they're going to just get the puck back and walk through everyone. But yeah, any further thoughts from Misa on yourself?
Yeah, just from listening for you talking about his a skill set from Elite Prospects, I think he's going to be a perfect foil in the end to Macklin Celebrini, like just popping up where, just following in his sort of shadow, as it were. But again, it's very interesting. What would you think San Jose would have done if they did have the first overall pick? Do you think they would have gone Schaefer, or do you think they were always had their eyes set on Misa?
I think they would have gone Schaefer. With them having the high-end defensive talent that they have. I know they did take Sam Dickinson from the defense on in a previous draft. But I think in terms of rounding out their team and building a bit more of a bit more depth in the lineup, sort of from top to bottom, I think they would have gone with Schaefer had that number one pick landed with them. Obviously, it didn't. It went to New York, and I don't think that there was ever going to be a situation where the Islanders looked to sort of trade that pick. So I think San Jose probably looked at it and thought, it's maybe not perfect. We would have preferred Schaefer, but you're not going to turn your nose up at someone with 2 points a game. Yeah, I think they'll be very happy overall. And just one more thought on Misa, sorry, with his entry level contract signed. I think it all points to potentially you could see Michael Misa play this season in the NHL. Teams do also have an option to play them for. I think they get a 9-game trial at the start of the season, and if they have 9 games to make a decision if they want to send them back to juniors or not, or potentially even to the AHL with the new rules saying that they can, each AHL team can now have one player under the age of 20, and maybe San Jose will think that Misa's better developing down there. But yeah, I think there'll be a lot of eyes on the Sharks this season, I think.
Yeah. Perfect. So we'll go on to the third overall pick then. Your Chicago Blackhawks selecting Anton Frondell, the Swedish centre. Yeah, I'll let you lead off with the Blackhawks pick there.
Yeah, I think it was. I think from this point in the draft, I think the first 2 picks were always going to be quite set in stone. But I think from picks number 3 down to, I would say, 8 or 9, maybe even 10, it really was going to be open to interpretation. Chicago went with Frondell, a good pick, I think. Played in Djurgården in the Swedish second tier last season, and actually got promoted with them in the Swedish leagues. They do run sort of a promotion relegation system, similar to we'd have in like the Premier League over here, for example. But he scored 25 points in 29 games last season, 11 goals and 14 assists. So immediately, the numbers don't jump off the page. But what's really important to recognise with Frondell here is he spent the season playing in a men's league. The likes of Schaefer and Misa playing in the OHL, they're very much playing amongst their peers. Kids who are 17, 18, 19. whilst Frondell was playing against guys in their 20s, in their 30s, in a Djurgården team that actually includes former Blackhawks Stanley Cup winner Marcus Kruger in that team as well, just as a little fun fact there. But I think what really separates Frondell from some of the other pack is the physicality. 6'2" already, but 204 pounds. He does really have a very physically dominant body, very strong. He's got an absolute rocket of a one-timer as well. Again, will be interesting to see if he pans out as a long-term centre or as a winger. It was really interesting seeing an interview with him over the summer after the draft, in which they spoke to Frondell, and he ultimately said, I'm happy to play wherever Connor Bedard doesn't want to play. So potentially they could flip-flop between the two of them, one on the centre, one on the wing. But I think certainly on the power play, with Bedard and Frondell, they're going to have a left-handed and a right-handed rocket, which is going to make him an absolute threat. Elite Prospects describes Frondell as his separating skill is his ability to get open away from the puck, combined with his high-end shooting talent. He gets off the wall and beats defensemen for rebounds and deflections, pushing the pace away from the puck, but also slowing down or dropping to the high slot when it's the right course of action. So I think they're going to have someone who's going to bring a bit of beef, a bit of physicality to the team. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see. He's going to be returning to Sweden this season, back to Djurgården now that they're in the SHL. But potentially at the end of their season, there's every opportunity that he could come across to Chicago and maybe play in the final sort of 9-10 games of the season. So hopefully he'll be able to come in and get a little bit of a taste of NHL life at the end of the year.
Are you happy about the pick personally?
Yeah, absolutely. I am. I think there's a lot of pros, and I think really this number 3 pick was a bit of a strange one, like as I mentioned before, because there were so many options, many of which I think a lot of the fans would have been happy with. I like it. I like the fact that they've picked someone who's already got a lot of experience playing against men, and I think that will make his transition to the pro game in the US being a bit more straightforward. Because I think sometimes a lot of kids come out of the CHL and they get rocked for the first time by a bloke in his early 30s who's sort of 230 pounds and just absolutely knocks.
Bedard, didn't it?
It did, yeah. He got an absolute kind of walloping, broke his jaw, and had to wear the bubble helmet for in his debut season. Yeah, so and it can certainly be a bit of a shock to the system. But I think having someone who's got a bit of that experience already and will have another year of experience with that, I think will benefit him. I don't necessarily think that Frondell is going to be. He's not going to be sort of an elite kind of franchise-defining player, but I think what they've got is someone who is very comfortably going to be in Chicago's top 6 forwards for the next decade. So maybe less of a higher ceiling. Yeah, absolutely. Less of a higher ceiling, but definitely more of a higher floor. So it'll be interesting to see. I think he's going to be playing in the World Juniors with Sweden this year as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how he does out there.
Good. I'm excited for you. We'll go to the 4th overall pick then. The Utah Mammoth, Caleb Desnoyers, another listed centre. Who knows where he's going to play? Obviously from the Moncton Wildcats in the QMJHL. That's a mouthful, isn't it? But again, he scored 84 points in 56 games last season. Another left-handed shot forward. What makes him different to any of those that we've talked about before in Misa and Frondell?
I think what you see from Caleb Desnoyers is somebody who is a really, really good playmaker. Elite Prospects describes him as constantly involving teammates in his play. Desnoyers bases his transition game on short passes, give and goes, and delay plays. Connects with teammates in all directions, displaying advanced precision and awareness at 5-on-5, as well as a high level of deception on the power play, attacking downhill, challenging defenders, and threading passes across and to the far post. So I think they've got someone who is going to be a really good playmaker for them, but also I think is someone who has certainly displayed at this level his ability at the 200-foot game. And what I mean by that is someone who can be A huge center. Uh, no, someone who can be effective in all three areas of the ice. So someone who can display quite a defensive presence, as well as someone in the neutral zone who can win play and transition through, and then be effective in the offensive third as well. £182 might have to sort of beef up a little bit, but again, it's always really important to note when we talk about these players that they're kids. You know, they're 18, 19 years old, and they're also going to be under the watchful eye of NHL trainers who are going to tell them exactly what to eat, what to lift, and also their bodies are going to naturally develop as well. So he's £182 now, but I think that I think we'll definitely see him get a little bit bigger. As you mentioned with the QMJHL, there's three leagues that make up the Canadian Hockey League, the CHL, the Canadian Juniors. And that's the QMJHL, the OHL, and the WHL. Now, the QMJHL, or the Q, as we refer to it, I think is often regarded as maybe competitively, maybe the weakest division amongst those three. But, don't let that detract, your views and opinions, and certainly Utah fans with their thoughts on Denoye. Still going to be a very good player. Someone who, again, when I've listened to interviews with him over the summer, seems very confident in his own ability. Really, really models his game off the likes of Jonathan Taves and players like that. So definitely seems to know how he wants to play. And yeah, it'll be good to see if he can act on that going forward. And again, might be a player that we see get some minutes at Utah at the end of the year.
Yeah. Is he going back to the Q this year, do you think, then? Or is he going to be playing mostly this year?
Think it's probably likely that he will. I think, I think that maybe just another year of him. Obviously he was playing at above a point a game last year. Maybe see if he can do that again, or potentially, trades do take place within the CHL. Maybe he ends up getting traded to, maybe to an OHL side or a WHL side. It'll be, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with him yet, but hopefully might be another one that gets some time in the NHL at the end of the year.
Right, we'll go on to the fifth overall pick then, the Nashville Predators. This time, another forward, Brady Martin, from the Sioux Greyhounds of the OHL. Again, similar-ish numbers to Denoye. He's got 72 points in 57 games. What do you want to say about Brady Martin?
Well, first things first, I think Brady Martin has one of the best write-ups on elite prospects going. So they describe him as, when Brady gets ahead of steam, he looks unstoppable. He weaves through the neutral zone, alternating between holding the puck deep in his hip pocket and perfectly timed pushes through sticks and feet. With a seemingly bottomless bag of tricks, he regularly makes the flashy look easy. A destructive force, Martin is a uniquely heavy and frequent hitter. He slams opponents into the wall and throws them to the ice before chasing down his next victim. He battles hard, proactively wins inside position, lands heavy reverse hits, and keeps that energy in the defensive zone, which, you read that and you think, what on earth are Nashville going to be getting? And I think that
exactly what they need.
Yeah, someone he seems like someone who has a really, really high ceiling. And this was the first pick, really, that I think turned a few heads and raised a few eyebrows. Martin started the year very much sort of in the late teens of the sort of draft rankings. He's then sort of moved his way up over the course of the year. And going into draft week, there was a lot of people saying, he might sort of go around that 10 or 11, but maybe don't be surprised if he goes sort of 7 or 8. But, he's gone at number 5 to Nashville. And like I said, for 6 foot and £186, again, I know he's playing against his players of his peers in the OHL, but he's just an absolute battering ram. But not only that, he has just an endless amount of flair, and a lot of the clips I've seen from him is, his ability to deep players more or less out of their shorts. Is really, really special, and has the potential to be an absolute star, I think, and could end up potentially being a bit of a steal. But yeah, will definitely be something that Nashville need moving forward. Don't think we'll see him in the NHL this year. Think we'll see him go back to Sioux or maybe somewhere else. But I would be surprised if we saw Brady Martin play in the NHL this year, unless, as I've mentioned before, it's a few games at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a prime player for when they eventually enter their rebuild and get rid of all the old aging stars that they decided to sign in the past few off seasons.
Yeah. God, it was a bit of a mess with that, and they're tied into a lot of money for the next few years. But I think that hopefully, yeah, Martin can come and help be a bit of a reset there. Okay, yeah, moving into the sixth overall pick. I love this player. I know you do too. The Philadelphia Flyers selecting Porter Martone, the 6'3" right winger from the Brampton Steelheads in the OHL. Right-handed shot. He scored 98 points in 57 games last season and will be playing at Michigan College in the 25-26 season. So, prime example of what we're seeing a lot of in the CHL of Canadian junior players going and playing in the US collegiate system in the NCAA, which has its own sort of list of pros and cons. But yeah, do you want to kick us off with anything on Martone, Nathaniel?
Yeah, I do like this player. Love the name. It's a proper, like I say, proper Philly name in it. Porter Martone on the wing. Anyway, uh, well, elite prospects have him down as well. Martone is known as a power forward. It's more accurate to describe him as a playmaker. The patterns of the game seem imprinted in his mind. He constantly scans the ice, knowing his teammates' tendencies, systems, rotations, and the expected movements of defenders. He stays connected with line mates, avoids coverage, and puts himself in advantageous spots to make the next play. He builds deft passing plays, moves ahead of the opposition, and preys on defenders and goalies' expectations, manipulating them to open up possible scoring opportunities. I just think he's going to be when he eventually gets to the Flyers. I think he's going to be the exact player Tortorella would have wanted when he was coaching them. But yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know
he's
much more you want to say.
Yeah, he's like you said, he's the exact kind of guy they would have loved down there, and he's someone who I think the Philly fans are going to take to massively. Obviously, they're going to be able to see him a bit more playing at Michigan than they would have done if he'd stayed at Brampton. But I think there's like the write up from Elite Prospect mentions, I think a lot of people saw Martone at 6'3", 204 pounds, and they thought that's it. He's going to be a big, heavy hitting power forward who's, much like the Kachucks or something like that. And I think that's quite incorrect. I think for someone of his size, he doesn't necessarily play big. There's very much a difference between being big and playing big, and there's definitely another player in this list who fits that description who we'll get to. But whilst he's not soft by any stretch of the imagination, he's not out there laying out 9, 10 hits a game. He's very, very silky on the puck. Really good eye for a pass, can score plenty of goals as well. And I think as you look forward for the Flyers with Matvei Michkov as well, hopefully having him up there with Michkov being an absolutely brilliant goal scorer, if they can have Martone feeding him the puck, potentially centered by Trevor Zegras, that could be quite an exciting line for the Flyers moving forward, or maybe gets paired up with Travis Konechny or someone like that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how his game transitions. I think he was definitely one of those players who was talked about in that sort of third overall spot with Chicago's pick. And the biggest criticism of Martone was a lot of people saying that he doesn't skate well, which again I don't think is particularly true. I think he skates fine, but that's maybe just not quite what a lot of teams would want. Again, I've seen plenty of interviews with him over the summer, and he's very much aware that his skating is something that needs a bit of improvement, but it's something that he's committed to working on. And if he can add that extra half a yard or yard to his speed, he's going to be an absolute weapon for Philadelphia moving forward. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see what kind of player he can be. And yeah, I think that Philly could have a bit of a steal there.
Yeah. I think of doing good, having another year in college, etc., to just polish off those weaknesses, working in conjunction with obviously the Flyers staff, etc., as well, just to get it all polished off. Um, we'll go into the seventh overall pick. Definitely a standout highlight pick for me here. Boston selecting James Higgins. Now I'll want to quickly deflect back to the first overall pick with the New York Islanders. This is about where they would have been picking had they not won the lottery, the Islanders. And with James Higgins coming from Long Island and supporting the Islanders himself, a lot of people were placing James Higgins to the Islanders. But instead, he goes to Boston. He's going to be playing at Boston College this year. He played at Boston College last year as well, so still kind of hometown feel for Higgins. Point per game player, centre. What have you got to say about him?
I mean, talking about steals with Martone, Higgins could be the steal of the entire draft for me. An absolutely outstanding player, and I was really, really surprised that he went down as far as 7, even when the Islanders moved up to the first overall pick. He was still potentially in that conversation of going first overall. And we've seen this a few times over the last few years. In the last couple of years, Higgins has been. He's kind of been talked about as the de facto number 1 overall pick for like the last couple of years, very much like what we saw with Shane Wright a few years ago before he ended up getting drafted to the Kraken. And for whatever reason, his draft stock just fell. And I don't think that it's anything necessarily that Higgins has done wrong. Like you said, he put up a point per game, 37 points, 37 games, 11 goals and 26 assists as a college freshman last year in his first year at Boston College. So had a really, really good season. I think that his stock has maybe fallen purely because of the overperformances of some of the other players. But I think Boston have got an absolute steal here. I mean, Elite Prospects describes him as seemingly being part of the hockey world zeitgeist from a young age, a fluid skater who's light on his edges. He leverages full range wingspan handling, high activity rate crossovers, and a motor to create constant advantages. He layers pucks through tricky seams, hooks and slips, feeds around pressure, and improvises on the fly with lightning quick processing, punching away from threats and funneling play to the inside. Yeah, I think they've got an absolute gem here. Someone who's really, really going to excel at the college level again next year. And when he gets to Boston, depending how that team's looking, could end up being their centre for a long time to come. There was maybe some concerns of him only being 5'11", 186 pounds, etc. But you know he's gonna get bigger, and there seems to be a general consensus of a lot of players. If they're under 6 foot, then they can't play, which is just could not be more incorrect. Maybe in a past sort of period of the NHL, maybe in the 90s, for example, when it was a lot of physicality, a lot of fighting, a lot of big hits. But now we see plenty of players under that 6 foot marker who thrive at this level. So I think Higgins is going to be an absolute stud for Boston.
Can't agree anything more. I think it's what Boston will need as well. A new young buck to support it in that team. But other than that, unless you have anything more to say, shall we move on to the 8th pick?
Yeah, no, nothing really to add on Higgins any further. So, we'll move into the 8th overall pick. The Seattle Kraken taking Jake O'Brien. Yet another centre, as I did mention, it was quite a centre-heavy draft. 6'2", 177 pounds. Played last season at the Brantford Bulldogs in the OHL. And again, to my knowledge, from what I understand, he will be playing at Brantford again in the 25-26 season. 98 points in 66 games last year. They describe him at Elite Prospects as having close to X-ray vision. O'Brien spots the tiniest seams between skates, under sticks and above him. He sees through multiple defenders and behind his back, spotting teammates running at the back post and attacks a few steps late. When he can't spot a lane, he creates it, shifting defenders or faking a shot before dropping the puck to teammates. So again, just another elite playmaker. And looking at the Kraken as a whole, they've got Shane Wright, as we discussed earlier. They've got Matty Beniers. They could potentially be adding O'Brien in there and adding again another really good, exciting young forward piece to that core. So yeah, what are your thoughts on O'Brien? I think there might be maybe some concerns potentially around his sort of sizing at the moment.
Yeah, he's sort of very long and gangly, isn't he? And whether that'll hold up physically. Yeah, it's tough to say that as much as we want to plug and play these players and see where they're going to fit in a lineup, still will take a bit of time to get caught up. I don't think O'Brien will necessarily see him in the NHL this year, and even if so, it's at the back end of the season. But I just think it's a very very solid pick. Nothing jumped out to me. It was kind of like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think he kind of fell exactly where he was expected to fall. Again, I think his playmaking definitely seems to be the elite part of his skill set. 66 assists in 66 games, and then chucking an extra 32 goals there on top of that. Yeah, I think. Yeah, 177 pounds at 6'2", bit of a string bean at the moment. But as we've mentioned with so many of these kids, once he gets under the proper training and sort of stewardship of the NHL coaching staff, he'll pack that weight on, not a problem. And I think just to go on a slight tangent here, I think this is when I've mentioned before. Obviously, you've got players playing in the CHL and the Canadian juniors. And then you've got players playing in the NCAA. I think one of the reasons that you're seeing a lot of players go and play in the NCAA now is the CHL is very much it's similar to the NHL in terms of its game workload. You're seeing they're playing sort of 60 plus games. It's very much like 2-3 games a week, sometimes back to back nights, and they don't necessarily get the time to be in the gym or with the nutritionists or sort of developing physically. Whilst, you look at the NCAA level and they're playing a game a week, which means for the rest of that time, they're able to be in the gym. They're able to be, lifting weights, putting on the size. And, a lot of these big colleges in the US, your likes of, your Boston colleges and your Michigan colleges and things like that, they're going to have really, really top end sort of nutritionists and trainers and things like that. So, they're maybe not playing as many games and getting that game experience, but they're getting all the off the ice stuff. Whilst in the CHL, they're sort of getting that game experience, but maybe not as much of the physical development. So it's very much horses for courses, I think, and what suits that player better. But yeah, I thought it was just an interesting point of sort of the progression line of these players.
Yeah, sometimes you need more match experience and develop your skills on ice, and sometimes you need the uh, background, building a genetic makeup and studying, etc. And that might, yeah, I think that's a very valid point, and not many people might think about really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Uh,
couldn't agree more. And with that, we'll move into the ninth overall pick for Buffalo, another first round pick defenseman, because they needed another one of those. They have drafted Radim Merker, 6'6", 218-pound defenseman from the Seattle Thunderbirds in the WHL. Who's a right-hand shot. Now, he has already signed his entry-level contract, but he will be returning to the Seattle Thunderbirds for the 25-26 season. Got 35 points in 43 games. Yeah, Nathaniel, do you want to lead us off on Mr. Merker?
Yep. Well, elite prospects say that while Merker isn't a particularly punishing player, he's an active and aware defender. He scans for threats, ties them up, and rotates well. Though he lands the occasional big hit, his physical impact comes through his ability to absorb contact, win retrievals, and deny space. With possession, Merker's no slouch either. He makes tricky passes off the wall on retrievals, joins the rush, and manages space well at the top of the zone. So all that being said, he sounds like a pretty handy defenseman, and no doubt in the end of his entry-level contract in 3 years' time, he will be playing for another team other than Buffalo.
Yeah, in classic terms, they'll spend 3 years developing a prospect before they decide, no, we're not bothered about him, and we'll just ship him off somewhere for a fourth round pick or something. Yeah, but Merker is another example. We touched on it with Martone as someone who is big but doesn't necessarily play big. At 6'6", think, again, a lot of people would look at that and go, a 6'6", 218-pound teenage defenseman, he's surely just out there, an absolute sort of human wrecking ball, just destroying people all over the ice. But that's not his game. That's not how he plays. I think he does have a little more finesse than someone of his height and weight would usually maybe be expected to have. But I think it'll be interesting to see his development path and if he develops that more physical side to his game, because it doesn't necessarily mean because he's 6'6", he has to be, absolutely physically dominant. I mean, we've seen the likes of Victor Hedman over the years be a really sort of elite puck carrier and distributor and a great shot and everything. He's not just out there sort of bulldozing people like, I don't know, the likes of Zdeno Chara would have done back in the day. But just a quick point on maybe the sort of strategy, because some people may not be familiar with sort of the entry level contract. So when a player gets drafted by a team, they hold their draft rights and they can then sign them within a period of 2 years. Or I believe that with the new collective bargaining agreement, that is actually increasing. You can sign a player to what's called an entry-level contract. Now, an entry-level contract is 3 years, and it's capped at a certain dollar value. So I think it's just under $1 million a year at the moment, which I'm personally a big fan of. It's the NHL's way of saying, we're not going to give these kids, these 18, 19-year-olds, we're not going to give them the keys to the kingdom and a Lamborghini off the bat. We're going to keep them. I mean, don't get me wrong. 950,000 or whatever it might end up being is absolutely, more money than I had at 18. But these guys aren't coming straight out the draft and getting $6-7 million deals a year straight out the gate. So sometimes a team might have a player sign that entry-level contract and then send them back to their junior team so that by the time they come up to the NHL, they've only got 2 years left on that deal, which means they get them to that next deal a bit quicker, which might be able to help them save a bit of money on that second contract. Because let's say they didn't sign Merker this year and they signed him next year. And then in that third season of his contract, he puts up amazing numbers at Buffalo. And then all of a sudden, his next contract's gone up by a couple of $1 million, which in a hard salary cap, it makes it maybe a bit more difficult to manage. So sometimes teams will burn that first year so that they can get to that next contract quicker. So the player might not make as much money as maybe they could have done, but equally for the player as well, they're also getting to that next contract a bit quicker, and they're getting a bit more money in their pockets at an earlier time. So yeah, I thought it was just an interesting note. Just with an ELC signed doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see them in the NHL right away.
Yeah, I think with Merker as well. I think he signed one of the first players to sign it. He's betting on himself. He knows who he is. He knows what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know whether it's because I know we keep piling on Buffalo, but maybe he saw he got drafted by Buffalo and thought, let's get to the next contract quicker and go somewhere else potentially. But I just think he's going to be a good player. We will see him in the league, and I reckon he, like with any sort of first round pick, you expect him to have a good NHL career. I think that Hedman comparison is fairly accurate. Obviously, we'll see if it comes to light, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one more thing on Merker. If anybody gets an opportunity to take a look at the photos from draft day, so there'll always be a picture of the player, in his new team's jersey, sometimes maybe holding up like a puck with the NHL Entry Draft sort of logo on. That's the picture that gets used sort of in their, in their trading cards and their pictures, all that sort of thing. And you would have thought, looking at Radim Merker, that there was someone stood behind the camera with like a shotgun aimed at his face or something. He looks like he's being held at gunpoint, complete ransom in this Buffalo Sabres jersey. He could not look more miserable to be there. Maybe that's just his. Maybe that's just his personality. Maybe he's just got a bit of a. Maybe that's just sort of his face. But he genuinely looks absolutely mortified to have been drafted by Buffalo, which I can understand. But I just, if anyone gets a chance to look at that.
I've just loaded that up. What am I looking at here? He
He's
does not want to be there, and all them other people stood around him are dead happy, and he's just like, "What the fuck?"
yeah, he's
Stop
devastated, isn't he?
telling my French.
We'll
Great shout,
we'll
great shout.
we'll be posting that picture up onto our Instagram page at the PBP podcast. If you want to go follow us there, so you can take a look at Redeem Merker being held at gunpoint. Then yeah, you can go ahead and do that. Okay, that moves us into the final.
I felt like that at times. Yeah.
That moves us into the
Um,
10th pick, and one of the most interesting picks in the draft for me. Selected number 10 to the Anaheim Ducks, Roger Lightning McQueen, 6'6", 198-pound centerman, playing for the Brandon Wheat Kings last season in a year that was again absolutely hammered by injury. Only managed to play 17 games, 10 goals, 10 assists. So, yeah, do you wanna lead us off on Mr. McQueen, who just has one of the best names in the draft for me?
yeah. Best names. I mean, talk about just feel good vibes in comparison to the ninth overall pick with poor old Merker at Buffalo. Like, can McQueen have any more fun? Like in the draft process,
Well,
this is going to be one of my favourite players from time to come. I feel.
yeah, definitely.
Um, in terms of his actual skills on set, and not just his name and the fact that he's Lightning McQueen being signed to a team that was previously owned by Disney, but that's by the by. A highly skilled offensive player, McQueen combines pace with mechanical refinement, a deep arsenal of tricks. Always in motion, he catches pucks inside crossovers, takes the middle, and attacks defenders one-on-one. He fakes one way before going the other, using his full wingspan to bait the defender and beat them to the other side. He spaces the offensive zone well, often controlling the game from the half wall, only to slip inside at the net front for a chance. He's also a very skilled passer, landing hook, slip, and backhand passes through layers, all while looking off his target and at speed. I think the main concern here is his injury background, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the reason that McQueen has been drafted at 10th, and I know we're touching on the top 10 picks, but with Pittsburgh picking at 11, if McQueen had still been available, I would bet everything I have on him being a Pittsburgh Penguin. He'd have been absolutely perfect for them. But I think McQueen's skill set, he was another player who people were talking up, maybe being like a top 5 pick. But I think especially when it comes to back problems, especially it makes teams a little jittery. We saw it last year, I believe it was last year's draft. Yeah, that's right. It was the Ivan Demidov, Artem Levshinov draft year. We saw the Columbus Blue Jackets select Caden Lindstrom at 4th overall, who again had been sort of suffering some back problems, and he missed more or less the entirety of last year with a similar injury, and he seems to have gotten over it now. It'll be interesting to see how he manages that moving forward, as he develops. But especially with someone at 6'6" with a bigger frame, back problems could be. It's going to go one of two ways. He's either going to shake it off at an early age, or it's going to absolutely sort of derail him and just absolutely sort of, really make him struggle. But I think he's committed to the to Providence College for the 25-26 season. So again, another player jumping from the Canadian Hockey League to the NCAA. And yeah, I think it'll be really, really interesting to see how he does sort of in that college environment. And as we touched before with the sort of the strength and conditioning, maybe that's exactly what he needs to help him get over his back problems and not playing sort of such a demanding schedule as he would have had in the WHL. But yeah, like you said, just the absolute feel good factor of this draft pick. He's been given the number 95 jersey, akin to Lightning McQueen. He was flown straight from the draft, right the way out to Disneyland on a helicopter, so he could meet everyone there. Yeah, it was just a really, really, it just seemed really fun. And he joins an Anaheim team that, again, is just absolutely stacked, in the offensive areas. Leo Carlson and Cutter Gauthier and, Mason McTavish, providing that, they can get that contract issue sorted, and Troy Terry. And, it's just going to be someone who's going to be another really sort of exciting piece to add to that. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on McQueen before we get everything wrapped up?
Don't drive cars fast. Don't go on any big roller coasters. Just get in the gym, get going, and let's see you in the NHL as soon as possible, please. That would be my ask.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I think it was an interesting draft this year, because there wasn't necessarily that. Whilst I think it was understood that Schaefer would be going in that first overall pick, a lot of that top 10 and a lot of the rest of the first round that followed really did seem open to interpretation. Wasn't necessarily as clear cut as to who was going to go where. We might see Misa and Schaefer this year. I don't think we'll see many of the others, if not maybe for a few games at the back end of the season. But I'm looking forward to seeing these guys come in the future and see the next stars of the league sort of unfold in front of our eyes.
Absolutely. And with that, I think it's time to wrap up the episode. Have you got any sort of final thoughts before we go?
No, nothing further from me. Just as we mentioned, we're going to be focusing on a specific topic area with a slightly shorter podcast each week. If you have any areas or anything, any suggestions that you think of anything that we'd like to cover, then just please get in touch with us. You can reach us at penaltyboxperspective@gmail.com, or both on X and Instagram at the PBP podcast. And I don't think there's anything further to add. But no, thank you very much for listening as always. And we'll see you guys next time.